Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to tonight's broadcast. I am Jessica Grant, your host for Now What, a podcast aimed at helping with all things parenting. For those of you who didn't turn in to our last podcast and may not know me, I am a pediatrician and I'm a mom. I'm a pediatrician at Manhattan Valley Pediatrics. I practice on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We opened in April of 2020 with the goal of being really accessible and being a really warm environment for raising families. Our motto is grow with us, and I think that really represents who we are. Our goal is that we grow from our families and learn what they need, and they grow under our guidance and raise their children. And I think it's been a really fun, exciting 2 years so far. I am also a mom, as I mentioned. I have a daughter who turned 7 yesterday, and I have an almost 4-year-old. And I still remember coming home with my first and laying her in the bassinet and looking at my husband and saying, "Oh, now what?" with a little bit of panic, hence the name of the podcast. And I remember thinking, as I think a lot of new parents do, where's the manual? Why can't there be a manual telling me how to do this? After all, I had a manual for how to do medical school. I have lots of manuals of how to be a good pediatrician. Where is my manual of how to do this parenting thing? And in retrospect, I'm really glad there is no manual. I've come to realize there really is no one way to parent. There's no one thing that works for all families, and that's okay. To this end, on this podcast, I hope to have on lots of different people, sometimes people in the same specialty over the course of several months, and families can pick what works for them, what helps them do what makes sense for their little pod of a family. Because there are lots of ways to raise a joyful, fruitful, productive, wonderful child. My goal is certainly to appeal to everyone in the far reaches of the internet, but I particularly want to appeal to New York City families, given that I work in New York City. I think there are some really unique challenges to working and living here and raising a family here, from noise levels to overcrowding to having a nosy neighbor who lives just a thin wall away versus across the street. And so I hope that over the course of these podcasts, I can give some wisdom, or my guests can give some wisdom that specifically appeal to the New York City families. Tonight, I'm really excited. We have on Ashley Olson. She's the founder of Heaven Sent Sleep, and I think it's going to lead to a really lively conversation. Ashley is great in the sense that she's really data driven and she's really, really logical in how she approaches sleep training. And I think that will appeal to a lot of families out there. Personally, I'm a huge believer in sleep training. I am the kind of person who, if my kids wake me up at night, I may not go back to bed for the next hour to hour and a half. And so multiple wake ups is a disaster for me. So I strongly encourage parents to take whatever they can from this. I think it's a really great opportunity. The way the podcast will work tonight, as it always will, is there'll be about 30 or 40 minutes of kind of Ashley and I speaking, me running some ideas by her giving you a great overview. And then we'll throw open to parents' questions. Please write in. No question is too big, too small, too general, too specific. This is supposed to be a really comfortable place so that you can get what you need out of this. And hopefully it's really fun. To that end, without any further ado, I want to bring on Ashley and let her tell you a little bit about herself. Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about you and what you do so our viewers know.
Absolutely. So I am a mom of 3 with almost 4. I've got one baking right now, hopefully give birth soon. I live in the very warm state of Texas, so it's a lot of fun growing a baby here in the summer. And honestly, I opened Heaven Sent Sleep about 4 years ago. Because I needed a me whenever I had my first child 7 years ago. He did not sleep the night we got home from the hospital. I couldn't put him down and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help him. And if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 5, and that means I'm a serial researcher. So before I had him, I researched so many things about birth and breastfeeding and just baby-led weaning, like things that didn't matter right then. But I didn't clue in that I would need to learn anything about sleep before I had him. So we were just really at a loss, and spent quite a few months in this sleep deprived state that really was not sustainable, and just got us in a not really great place, especially me mentally. And so I have a special kind of spot in my heart for parents, especially who are going through postpartum mood disorders, because my lack of sleep definitely contributed to struggling with anxiety and depression. And so once we started getting better sleep, I started enjoying motherhood so much more than, I had whenever we first started. So before I had my second child, I did all the things to research everything that I could about baby sleep before she came, so that we started on a much better foot. I couldn't parent, two kids in that same sort of state that we were in with our son. And so that led me to Heaven Sent Sleep, knowing that I wanted to help more families. And here we are now.
So first of all, I am amazed you have 3 and are brave enough to have a 4th. We are barely getting by with our little 2.
Only because we get good sleep.
Exactly. And I want to second what you said. I also had some postpartum anxiety and was definitely worsened by the lack of sleep. And so I think sleep is important in so many ways. So maybe that's a good first topic. Tell us a little bit about the benefits of sleep training and what you think that can do for a family.
Totally. So sleep training is really broad, and I know that hearing those words can sometimes turn parents off, but I think that there are still a lot of great things that you can gain from any sort of implementing any sort of sleep training method. And so definitely more sleep, more consolidated sleep. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sleep through the night. They're never going to need feedings. They're never going to wake up again. But you can have that predictability and consistency to know that when you go to sleep, you're going to get some stretch of sleep, versus when I go to sleep, are they going to wake up in 30 minutes? Is it going to be an hour? And that anxiety of not knowing, keeping you awake, and then you're not getting rest. And, it just spirals from there. And I think that it really benefits parents, especially because you can have other people put them down. It's not solely you all the time. It gives you that break, and you get that time in the evenings to reconnect, to do all the things that you need to do that allows you to actually be fully present with your child when they're awake too.
I also always tell families that I think it's really great for a relationship. When a 4-month-old is up until, 10 p.m., so what? But when your 1.5-year-old is pulling books off the shelves at 10 o'clock at night, it's very hard to speak to your partner in any meaningful way. And so I think families really appreciate having some family time come back together. So that's another reason I think it's nice to sleep train.
Yeah, we craved that. We were lacking that because if he was awake, he was screaming, and if he was asleep, we were holding him. And so, we just had no time to not be on or be mom and dad. We needed to be ourselves and be husband and wife too sometimes.
Exactly. And if you don't sleep train, do you think kids who are sleep trained tend to get more sleep overall? Do you think that it tends to give them not just longer stretches, but kind of more total sleep?
Yeah, that's actually what the research shows. Sometimes it's really significant and sometimes it's not super significant. But whenever you look at it, the data over time, the increase in sleep is definitely huge. And we know that there are benefits in getting more sleep. There's recent studies about hopefully moving back like school start times for that reason too, because they need more overnight sleep. They have better outcomes whenever, they're starting kindergarten, and they're able to get more total sleep overnight than if they were having to get up early for all the early start times.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my mentors, that was his big thing, was trying to get school times pushed back in New York City because they're creeping in the wrong direction, not in the right one.
Exactly. Yes, that was something that was on our radar when our first was going to start kindergarten. I was like, I have to get him up when and get him to school when? Like, that's so early.
Amazing. So can you talk about, some of the foundations to setting up for good sleep? I know you talk about some puzzle pieces, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So starting from when you get home, right? Like newborn sleep feels a little bit like the Wild West. And that's for good reason. They don't have a circadian rhythm. They don't understand days and nights, which is really hard for parents who do definitely understand their days and nights. And so you have a baby who wants to sleep all day and party all night, and no parent is, really prepared to handle that. Even, the most of the night owls out there, they do want to get some sleep at some point. And it's hard for us to nap all day when our baby is sleeping, because we still have other things that we need to do as well. So, so I always talk about, whenever you get home, try to set up some sort of routine that makes sense for your family, something that feels doable and sustainable. That's not a schedule. That's not something that's by the clock, but exposing your child to light during the day, keeping the evenings very low key and dim. They have to get those cues from the environment in order to help them start establishing those days and nights until their body starts producing melatonin for them. That means getting on a good feeding pattern too during the day, making sure that they're not going too long between feedings or having a really long stretch of sleep during the day, because they're only going to give you like one good long stretch of sleep, and you want that to align with your sleep as well. So if you can, wake them up a little bit more frequently during the day, get in nice full feedings, then you might see better, sleep overnight, and especially something that aligns more with your sleep. You can also start with just implementing a good routine before sleep, something that tells them, steps 1, 2, and 3, these things happen in the same order every night, and that means sleep is coming. And you can always build on that from, day 1 to, till they turn 5, 6, 7. I mean, my 7-year-old still asks me to, we do his teeth and his pajamas, and then we still have to sing his same song and say his prayers. And, those are all the things that we started doing whenever we started sleep training and implementing a bedtime routine. So it's definitely something that grows with you. And another huge thing with newborns is they get so overtired so easily. Their ability to stay awake that threshold is very, very low. And so watching for signs, sleepy cues, things that tell you that it's time for them to go to sleep. There's lots of different cues that they could give you, obviously yawning, red eyebrows, things like that. But being mindful of how long they've been awake can help them fall asleep a lot easier and stay asleep a lot easier, because when you hit those evening hours and they're overtired from being awake all day, you're just going to have a screaming baby, and that's no fun for anybody.
I found that, I think, was the single biggest thing that I was missing with my first. She was up for 3 hours. So this is amazing. And, my lactation consultant came over. She's like, why is your child up for 3 hours?
Yes.
But I was not good at reading her cues. So I just started watching the clock and kind of every 90 minutes getting her down. And it made a huge quality of life difference for me, but also for her.
For them, yes. I was just telling my husband about that the other day as we prepare for our 4th. I was like, do you remember when, I would feed him and then I would hand him to you and he would be all happy, and then you would hand me a screaming baby like 45 minutes later, and I thought, well, he's just hungry again, and I would feed him, but really he was just telling us he needed to go to sleep. And I thought that every crying thing meant I just needed to feed him. And that really did a number on my mental health too, because I had to hand off a happy baby and get handed a crying baby to fix it all the time.
Right. Do you think, for the New York City mamas out there, do you think it matters if they sleep in the same place every time that early? Or do you think it's okay to move them around? Because I remember sitting with my baby in the bassinet, and we were literally sitting in the kitchen, which was connected to where the baby was sleeping, in the dark, whispering to each other, and then I learned maybe I should just be putting her down in the bedroom when we're not in the bedroom, and back in her area when we are going to bed. And do you think it makes a difference?
I think that it is super beneficial for them to be exposed to a lot of different areas, or sleep in a lot of different ways. I mean, if that's on the go, if that's in the stroller, if that's being worn, I mean, the quality may be different. They may not sleep as well if they're out on a walk or whatever, but like, you got to get out of the house. You got to get out of that dark room. I have moms who've been sitting for 5 hours a day in a dark room, getting in all their naps, and, they're going crazy because they never get outside. They never get to do anything. And, it's not worth it. I think the 80-20 rule is the most beneficial rule of anything in parenting, where 80% of the time sure, they sleep in the most ideal conditions that you can give them, and 20% of the time sleep just happens however it happens. And there's you're not going to break them, or you're not going to instill any sort of bad habits or anything like that.
Perfect. And then, so to go back to the concept of kind of these four puzzle pieces, I think we had spoken about. So, can you walk me through specifically kind of what those are?
Yeah, so first one I always talk about is sleep environment. That's a very easy one to modify, or tweak if you need to. Outside of those early day night confusion days, you do want them sleeping in the dark. I mean, that's just sleep science. We all sleep better in pitch black, essentially. When our eyes are closed, we're still taking in light from our retinas, and so that's any light exposure is telling our body that we don't need our sleep hormones, and we definitely do. So that's always an easy one to just black out the room, no big deal. White noise is another huge one. Whenever they were in your womb, they were exposed to sound constantly from fluids and your heartbeat and all those things, and the decibel level of your womb was like 80. And so when they're born, it's a little disconcerting because it's quiet and variable, and they crave that like constant whooshing sound that you can get from white noise. So that's a very easy calming tool even to implement whenever they're really fussy. Tons of research about white noise shows that it improves sleep, and improves the quality of sleep and how quickly you fall asleep. So definitely use white noise. Nothing against white noise. It's not addictive. There's nothing bad. It's all good. And coolness is actually really beneficial for sleep and helping us relax and ease into a nice sleep. I live in Texas, so I know it's really hard to sleep whenever I'm hot and sweaty. So we always aim to have the air conditioner turned on for our nighttime sleep. So sleep environment, yeah, huge one, easy one to make changes to. And then the other one is the routines, like I talked about, simply just having, even just 3 or 4 things that you do before sleep that you do every time, or at least the majority of the time, that anybody can do, then that makes them going to sleep for other people a lot easier, going to sleep in other places a lot easier. And it just cues them. It tells their body, like, these are the things that happen, and then I go to sleep. Even adults benefit from having a sleep routine. And then timing, like I said, an overtired baby is going to have a very hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. So being mindful of wake times. Now, wake times themselves are not evidence-based. If you type in wake times in Google Scholar, you're not going to find anything that is across the board for every kid that's going to work. But it's a starting point. It's a way for you to gather that data to know, okay, this is how long they need to be awake, that they take a really great nap with, they fall asleep easily at this time. And so it just gives you insight into their sleep so that you know when they should be sleeping. And, that's just one less thing that you have to think about and worry about. And just one of those puzzle pieces that you can keep in place. And then the fourth one that I talk about a lot is independent sleep, or at least having a way that they fall asleep that's consistent. Whether that's the way that you assist them to sleep, or if they were putting themselves to sleep, that's another variable that we want to control for whenever we're working on improving sleep.
And I'll go back to environment if it's okay. First of all, I think the white noise is really interesting. I remember with my kids being like, I don't want white noise. I don't think this is good, based on absolutely no medical knowledge. I just decided this. And speaking to someone about how I think it's not good to have this constant stimulation all night long. And their response was, but what about the bus outside your window and you shuffling by the door? And they're tuning all that out anyway. I'm like, oh, you're right. There is constant background noise, especially for us city folks. So, it's probably better to have a consistent white noise. To be really nitty gritty, can you go through, because I find this to be really stressful. Do you have any particular products you like in terms of blackout curtains or in terms of white noise machines? Because I like to give people like a list. This is what you can go and buy.
I know, yeah. Curtains are so tricky because
Depends on the windows, I guess.
the windows, yeah, and just like if they let in light around the edges, or they truly black out, like sometimes it's a lot of trial and error of buying
Mhm.
the curtains and putting them up, and that can be really frustrating.
I think
Whenever
the best way to check is kind of to go in the room during the daytime, right, and close the curtains and
Yep.
close the door and see if you have light, basically. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
okay?
stay in there for like a couple of minutes, let your eyes adjust, and you would be very surprised that you're like, that is not pitch black at all. I mean, the monitor light probably is on for night vision, and then, if you have a smoke detector in the room, there's going to be a light on that. Like, we cover everything up with black electrical tape that we can. All those little pesky little lights. If you have a humidifier, that's another big one that people tend to have to cover up. I really like, for like a more permanent solution for blackout, is the Blackout Easy. They're not curtains, they're like a vinyl that velcros around the frame of the window.
Okay.
And so easy to take off. We had them on our son's window for like 4 years, I think, and whenever we moved, we just took the blackout panel off, removed the velcro from around the window, and it was like it was never there. But you can, unvelcro them to have them up during the day if you want some light in the room, and then pull them down and just revelcro whenever you're ready for them to have their room blacked out. But those are really like my favorite for something
Okay, that's
permanent.
great. I will tell
Yeah.
you, we were gonna move when I sleep trained my older one, and so out of desperation, I didn't wanna invest in anything, so I taped tin foil to
we
all the windows.
that's what we
And
had.
people across the street on 72nd Street were probably like, "Is this lady trying to beam aliens, like, into her home?" It looked crazy, but it got by, so maybe your
Yeah.
method would have been a little less ridiculous looking. And how about the white noise? Because you mentioned something really interesting about white noise when we spoke one time, and I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so whenever you're choosing a white noise machine, you want to choose one that will, one, get loud enough. A lot of times it's not going to be loud enough to drown out those sudden noises that wake kids up, like a dog barking, or slamming a door, anything that is outside of the norm is meant to startle us and wake us up. And so you want to keep it between 60 to 65 decibels, maybe a little bit louder, just depending on what you're trying to drown out. But that's a level of a conversation, and so that's really where you start to see the benefits of it for sleep. And then you want to choose one that is non-looping. So what that means is there are different machines out there that play like manufactured white noise, but it's on a loop. So like, let's say it plays for like an hour, and then the loop starts over. That like glitch whenever the loop starts over can actually wake you up, because your brain is still working, right? You're still filtering out all the environmental stuff while you're sleeping. And so it can pick up on that little catch in that loop restarting. And you can actually see frequent wakings just from the white noise looping. So in our family, we prefer the Sound of Sleep Lectrofan brand. They have a few different ones, some that are portable, some that have a nightlight. We have probably one of each, if not multiple of each, because we love, and it's pure white noise. Like when people say they hate the sound of white noise, I guarantee you they haven't heard like really good white noise, because and there are different colors of noise, and so I tend to go for lower frequencies like brown noise. But if it's grating to you, it's probably like manufactured to not be like pure, really great white noise. So I always say give it a try and see, or use like a fan or a fan noise, because that's going to do the same thing as white noise does.
Amazing. And then if you have a kid, you've done your 4 foundations, and you have a kid who's sleeping pretty good, maybe the pediatrician or you have helped tweak that kid, and then you get a bump in the road. The kid starts to tease, family visits, and starts holding the kid. Something disrupts their pattern. What then? What can you do to kind of reset them? Because I
I
think what
think
happens a lot is parents panic. Like, I already did sleep training once. I don't want to do this again. And then they just kind of steadily decline until I get a panicked phone call in the office.
right, yeah, and really, sleep training I feel like is a tool for you to always have in your back pocket as a way to respond to your kid in those situations. So just because you have to do a refresher, doesn't mean that it didn't work or that, it's something that you're going to be stuck doing forever. I always say, like, through regressions, the habits that you have during a regression or something, they're going to be there when the regression is over.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're considering, how am I going to respond to my child? How do I support them through whatever change they're going through? How can I do that while still maintaining our sleep boundaries? How can I do that while still maintaining that they fall asleep independently in their space? I can go in for a cuddle. I can rock you. I can pat your back. I can do whatever I need to do, but you can still do the work of falling asleep on your own. And I think that's where sometimes people get off track, is they start helping more and more and more with that falling asleep process. And then that's their child's like, hey, this is really cool. I actually really like that much more than what we were doing before. So I'm going to keep preferring that until, the parents change that loop, that habit loop, right? And they say, okay, this isn't working for us anymore as much as it's working for you. So we're going to have to make some changes here. And that's where, you can go back to your sleep training method. You could do a different method if you wanted to. Sometimes you have to change based on how old they are and what kind of habits crept back in. And I always say, like, habits are not moral. They're not right or wrong. They're not bad, but they're just habits, and they're just things that you've done repetitively. So all you have to do is change it. And everybody can change a habit, no matter what kind of habit it is. Even if it feels impossible, maybe it's a couple of hard nights, but it's just, you have to think about what feels sustainable for me, and can I continue doing it? If I can, great. And if I can't, well, then no big deal. We'll make a change and we'll get back to the place that we want to be in.
And then the other thing I really like that you talk about is kind of managing expectations and kind of things being, normal or okay. So can you talk through how families can think about, or how you think about it when you work with families?
Yeah. So, research gives us a lot of information about sleep. And so we can look at research to know what's normal. What is a kid at 6 months on average sleeping like? And so you can see that maybe, 6 months olds are waking for anywhere from 0 to 2 nighttime feedings, say, on average. And so whenever you're seeing more than that, then you're thinking, okay, well, that's a little bit out of the norm. So that's something that we could address and change to work maybe towards that norm, to getting them to those 0 to 2 ranges, right? So normal things are things that you expect developmentally. You expect a newborn to wake at night. You expect them to have that day-night confusion. Like, that is in line with where they are age-wise and developmentally. And then you start looking at things that are common. These are the things that you see in mom groups that everybody's like, oh, my kid's doing X, Y, Z, and I need to fix it, whether that's waking up, before the sun rises at 6 a.m., or they're awake for an hour or two at night, or they're having short naps and they're, old enough to be taking longer ones. And so those are things that we can definitely make a change and, improve those. And then I have the okay sleep rule. So this is something that doesn't bother you. And it doesn't matter if it's normal or common. It's just okay. And you're happy with it and you can live with it. Then you don't have to change that. Like, if that's how you want to live your life, then you live it. There's no pressure for you to make any sort of change in anything that is absolutely working for you.
I think that's really great for families to hear, because I think a lot of families, when I speak with them in the office and we talk about sleep training and do they want to get a consultant, I think a lot of them get this real angst that the sleep trainer is going to say, you must not, do this before they go to sleep, or you must not. And then people say, but I don't want to give that part up. And so I think they kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. They kind of say, we're not going to do any sleep training then. And I think what you're saying is there's ways to do it in ways that work for a family, which...
Right. Yeah. It's not one size fits all. It's not, this is the only approach and this is the only way to do things. It's keep the things that we like and we enjoy, and make changes towards the things that, we need to have a better quality of life with.
So maybe I'll ask just one more question, and then we're having some questions come in, so I definitely want to get to those. But can you tell a family, when is a good time to call you versus calling me? When is it a pediatric question? When do you think it's a sleep consultant question? I can certainly weigh in on that as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm talking to a family, I'm wading through those like medical red flags that I definitely, they're not behavioral. I know I can't fix that. Things like sleep apnea, when you're hearing snoring, things like that. That's not a behavioral thing. That's structural. I can't fix that. But if you're talking about my kid is taking an hour to fall asleep at night, I'm rocking him, I lay him down, he wakes back up, it's this battle every night of getting him to bed. Definitely, that's something that there's all the puzzle pieces that we need to look at to make sure that bedtime becomes an easier process for you. Or, my 9-month-old is still waking up for 3 nighttime feedings, and I really would just want him to get down to 1 feeding. That's totally possible. Things like that. It's not that you have to, if you're breastfeeding, you don't have to wean them in order to see that improvement in sleep overnight. You don't have to change their formula. You don't have to up their solids. Those are all things that we can work on with just sleep related things without having to, overhaul your whole day. And then, there's other red flags like maybe older kids who are really struggling, and you can't get them out of your room, but it doesn't feel it can feel more like maybe anxiety or something, which I think you can touch on, or even like restless legs, and looking at nutrient deficiencies and things like that could contribute to that impaired sleep for long periods of time.
Perfect. Yeah, I kind of say, the reasons I would want to be called, or maybe me first, would be, kids who aren't, young ones who aren't gaining good weight. Maybe we need to deal with reflux and kind of make sure they're okay from a physical point of view. I tell families, which maybe is a little bit of overkill, but kind of a sudden change, especially if they have a cold, could they have an ear
Ear
infection?
infection.
Because it happens and it's hard to know in the young ones. And even though 90% of the time it's not an ear infection, I think parents are more effective sleep trainers if they don't have that running through their head. But what if he's in pain? So I kind of say, let me just rule it out for you, and then go back to your sleep trainer and have faith that they're not, having an ear infection. And then I agree, the older kid oftentimes is anxiety based, and that's something that, is my wheelhouse for sure. But we have so many families who, want help with sleep, and I'm happy to help them. But at the end of the day, I only have so many tools in my toolbox. And I think you just have a lot more tools in your toolbox, and you work with them, I think, over a much longer period of time. How long do you usually spend with a family when you're sleep training?
2 weeks, usually at a minimum. Yeah. And our initial phone call is like 60 minutes, and when you're, in a well visit with your physician, you're covering all the other things as well. And so it can be hard to, get that sort of personalized advice that you're really looking for. And, sometimes parents aren't comfortable with a method that's going to get them quicker results. They want to do something that's more gradual, they feel more comfortable implementing. And so they really need more hand holding and more accountability, even to kind of see through like each step of a really gradual phased plan, and just keeping those expectations in check for, okay, you're not ripping off the Band-Aid, so that's not the kind of, result or progress that you're going to see. You can't compare that to using something like Ferber or Extinction, which are totally fine. But in my experience, like that's mostly the advice that they're getting from, a pediatrician, because
Yeah.
that's quick. That's what you can give them in that short amount of time.
Right. Absolutely. I completely. And I keep saying last question. This will really be my last question before I go. I find it so interesting. Do you speak to families mostly during the day and prep them for the night? Do you speak to them on the phone as the kids like wailing in the background? Like, kind of, how do you structure that support that you give them? I'm more just curious.
My goal is that going into bedtime, you're confident and know what you're doing. So I usually can get through most bedtime support with families, as long as there's not a really significant time difference. I work with families internationally. So I've had families in Japan, and I'm like, we kind of missed that little bit of time. But I want you to, we can recap what happened and talk about moving forward, and even just like a day by day plan as needed for, okay, this is what went really well, and this is what we're going to tweak. And that's really where that working with a sleep consultant comes in, is that maybe even day by day, things are slowly changing and we're making, little progress points and, little markers for, okay, we're going to get through this phase and then we're going to do the next phase. And so really it's a lot of nap to nap support, and then getting through bedtime and making sure they understand what to do for overnights. And then in the morning we recap and talk about, what we need to do moving forward, even for just that day or that bedtime.
I think that's amazing. I remember, when I realized I needed some help was when my, 3-year-old was really fighting bedtime as she does, but I started stressing about it at 4:30. She went to bed at 7. Like I spent 2 hours revving up my anxiety level, at which point I was like, I need someone to kind of help me at least not be anxious at 4:30 for,
Right.
a 7 o'clock plan would help. All right, amazing. So if it's okay, I'm going to start going through some questions from our callers. I'm so glad you guys are, writing in with questions. The first two were pretty similar. So the first question is, my almost 3-year-old was sleeping from 7:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. Lately, he has been giving us trouble falling asleep until 9, with multiple awakenings in the middle of the night, crying, wanting us to stay in the room, or climbing in our bed. And the second question said, our 3-year-old was sleeping 7:30 to 7, and now moving to the bed from the crib, can't stop, having multiple awakenings through the night. So I think they're hitting upon a really common age for sleep problems. I also mentioned my anxiety level with my 3-year-old. I think 3 is a really age. So what can we do?
There's a lot of control, I think, that they feel like they need to have at 3. Everybody talks about that 2-year regression, but they somehow forget, like, there's a lot of changes happening for a 3-year-old too. And so if they are napping still, that's where you might want to look at maybe not cutting it out entirely. Maybe they can't make it through the afternoon, but trimming it down. So if you've got a 2-hour nap, maybe just making it 1 hour so that you still have some of that sleep pressure that exist for bedtime, so they can go to sleep a little bit easier. And then I think giving them some of the control back, so it's not a fight with you, it's not that power struggle. So using visual routine charts really work well with older toddlers. So it makes them more of a part of the process as opposed to something that's happening to them, which, if you think about it, there's a lot of things that they just don't have control over in their day. And I think they start to realize that, especially at that age. So just like a simple, even picture chart that they can check off that they did, or they could move little stickers and move up to the next thing that they're going to do. There's lots of different ways that you can incorporate a routine chart at bedtime, especially if that's where those struggles are. And then whenever we're talking about those awakenings at night, so again, this is like, I think where some of that control comes in, is that they know that, like, that cause and effect. Like, they know if they do this, you will do, the result of that. And so I think that talking to them about things, really making them a part of the conversation of, okay, whenever you wake up in the middle of the night, this is what mommy's going to do. I'm going to come in, I will talk to you, and then mommy's going back to her bed. And yes, that they may have some feelings about that. And I think that it can intimidate parents with those toddler tantrums, especially in the middle of the night, because everybody wants to go back to sleep as soon as they can. And so that feels like the hardest thing to kind of handle are those wake ups at night. And especially when there's a big change for them, whenever they're transitioning out of that crib and going into a bed, they have so much more freedom that they didn't have before. And so that can feel overwhelming for them too. And so I think even using something like a bedtime pass, if you can't get them to stay in their bed at night, giving them a bedtime pass allows them to give them this one free chance to get out of bed. Like, it's in their control. They choose how they want to use their pass, and then they give it back to you. They go back to bed. If they get out of bed again, sorry, you've used your pass, and it's just right back to bed, and you really limit that back and forth and negotiating and any talking and all that stuff. Like, bedtime is not when that conversation needs to happen. We have those conversations during the day, so they're aware of the expectations and what's going to happen at bedtime in the middle of the night, and then we follow through with it.
I've never heard of the bedtime pass. I think that sounds amazing.
Yes.
What about when the 3-year-old says, I'm having nightmares all the time, which I'm going to argue as a pediatrician, those are not all truly nightmares. They very quickly learn that's a great little heartstring tug.
Yes, it pulls
Um,
on his heart. Yes.
yeah, but what do you suggest for those kids who are claiming whether they are or not having nightmares all of the time?
So for a true nightmare, if it is like that's something again we talk about it the next day. I like to with my own kids, I like to draw it out. Like, what did you dream about? And we
Mhm.
kind of draw it out, and that way it makes it look a little less scary in real life, and we can turn it into something funny. And so that's something that I found has worked really well whenever they're having like a truly bad dream. Obviously, heading it off to make sure nightmares aren't becoming a thing, like watching screen time before bed. Even I know a lot of people turn to melatonin sometimes, and we know that that's a side effect from taking melatonin at bedtime is having more nightmares. So just kind of digging in deeper to, okay, why could they be having these nightmares? And then whenever they kind of start playing it up that they're having bad dreams, it's really just about redirection. Okay, well, here's your stuffed animal that's going to keep you safe. Mommy is going to go back to sleep, and just reiterating, I think that safety aspect of things, like you're safe, nothing can get you in your room. I don't like to use things like monster sprays because I feel like that reinforces that there's something there to be afraid of, and I don't want them, to think about that. My daughter recently learned about coyotes. I don't know where or why, but she was afraid they were going to get into the house. And so that was a big thing for her. The coyote was going to come into the house and get her. And so we walked through the house. I showed her all the doors were locked. I showed her how we have the alarm, how nobody can get to her. They have to get through mommy and daddy first, like we always are there. And that was all she needed, just that reassurance and, like just like tangible things that show them that there is nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, that sounds great. I just want to put a quick word in from the pediatric point of view about the difference between nightmares and night terrors, which I think is a really, foreign concept to families.
Mm-hmm.
So night terrors, just for families listening, are different than nightmares. Nightmares are obviously dreams that are scary. Night terrors are physical outputs of crying where a kid may look very upset, but they're actually not. They're in a very deep stage of sleep. They're in very deep sleep. It's similar to sleepwalking where they're walking somewhere, but there's not really a purpose. Kids who are crying at night but are fast asleep and there's not really a purpose or having a night terror. Their eyes can be open, they can be sitting up, but when you try to comfort them, there's no, oh, clinging to you and I'm happy you're here and, thank you for coming for me, you've saved me type thing. There's really no response. And night terrors are not dangerous. They're really upsetting for families because the kids look distressed, but the kid really isn't. And there's no need to wake them up other than if you can't tolerate the yelling. And it may be very hard to wake them up. We do think maybe night terrors are a little more common in overtired kids. So trying to get
Mm-hmm.
them a little bit more sleep in general. But I just wanted to make that distinction because we get a lot of calls about nightmares and I'm not sleeping well. And then when I listen, they're actually not having nightmares. They're just actually having night terrors, which will come a lot in a row. And then you won't see again for a very long period of time.
Yeah, and there seems to be a genetic component to that too, right?
100%.
And they happen earlier in the night typically than a nightmare would too. So usually it's very easy to spot the difference between a true night terror and the nightmare for sure.
Yeah. And then another question that came in was with regard to white noise and other soothing sounds, while it's not addicting, our kids seem to have become reliant on the help. At what point, age, should we try to cut it off?
So here are my thoughts on that. It's not like you said, it's not addicting, but as far as reliance goes, we all have things that we associate with sleep that we prefer to have while we're sleeping. I have a pillow that I have to take with me everywhere. I don't sleep well without my pillow. So that's my sleep association. White noise is a positive sleep association. We want our kids to have multiple things that they associate with sleep because it makes sleep easier at home, but also everywhere else. And, so it's no problem for me to pack up our portable white noise machines and travel with them because they sleep best with them. And I want to get good sleep, whether I'm at home or I'm traveling with them. And so I also think that white noise is beneficial for everybody. There's not an age where nobody benefits from the quality of sleep that you get when you're using white noise. There's research about it reducing heart disease and risk of diabetes and dementia because you're getting better quality sleep. And we know that sleep deprivation can lead to an increased risk of those things. So it's not something that you should feel the pressure to not use or not have. I don't think that there's a specific age where I would say, hey, you don't have to use that anymore. Maybe if your kid is verbalizing that they don't want it or they want to turn it down or they want something different, then I would be open to exploring that if they said that. But even my kids tell me now that they want to sleep with it. Like where's my noise? I want to sleep with that. It makes me sleep better. I know this, it's just kind of part of a daily thing that they are used to talking about as far as sleep goes. So I don't think that I would have a specific age that I would say, don't use it anymore.
Perfect. In terms of, we're in the summer and a lot of our families are traveling. Any advice for travel in general and maybe a little bit more specifically changing of time zones and kind of what to do, when you go, what to do when you come back? Any suggestions?
I really believe that kids are more flexible with those changes than adults are. A lot of times whenever we've traveled, even an hour or two outside of our time zone, they jump right into that kind of new time zone without feeling hardly any of the effects, whereas I'm dragging for, a couple of days, right? But they really do just I kind of try to assume the new time zone as soon as we get there. I don't try to adjust beforehand or anything like that because you're really working against circadian rhythm to try to do that, whenever you're in your own time zone and you're trying to manipulate when they're exposed to light and all those things. It's just not worth the effort, I feel like, to do it beforehand. So as soon as you can, just jump into the newest time zone and stick with it while you're there. Sometimes it's beneficial. Like I have a friend who travels from Central to Eastern a lot. And so their kids get to stay up later, and that works better for them to, be able to do that when they're going out and, seeing family and doing dinners and all that stuff. So, think about what's going to work best for you. And then just kind of get into that time zone as quickly as you can. And I really think that if you're going to be room sharing with your kid, and maybe that's not something that you typically do at home, using something like the Slumber Pod is so helpful. It's this little pop-up blackout tent that goes over the pack and play and kind of gives them a blacked out environment, but also like a separate space from you. So if they were to wake up in the middle of the night, they're not like popping up over the edge of the pack and play like, hey, let's party, you're here. And just and it allows you to be on your phone or, get ready for bed, and it doesn't disturb them whenever you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and things like that. So I think that's a really helpful tool whenever parents are traveling.
And similarly, illness, when kids get sick and they start waking up more at night, any suggestions? That's a big question we get.
I always say match the level of intervention that you're giving with the illness. So if we're talking about a mild cold, sniffles, a little cough, like nothing that you're really alarmed about, it's just that maybe they're in daycare and it's just kind of that thing that sticks around, I really don't help more than I normally would for sleep, just because what I found with my own kids is that they end up just not going to sleep as well as they would have if I'm in there, trying to help them. They're more like, just go away. Like I'm fine, and then, if you do have a kid who is in that more severe, you've got vomiting or diarrhea or high fever, things like that, of course, you're going to be more present. You're going to be more helpful. You're going to hold them for sleep. You're going to let them sleep more. You're going to be monitoring them. You're going to be doing all those things. And oftentimes you'll have a sleep trained kid who, once they're well, can just kind of snap back into those old routines that you had beforehand. They don't always stick around and have those new preferences of suddenly being held all the time for sleep or anything like that. But, if they did, that's just kind of where you go back to that sleep training method, do a little refresher, shouldn't take more than a night or two. And then, you're back on track after that.
Perfect. I think the kids who actually you want to check on the most are the kids who are actually sleeping fine because they have a 102 fever and they're conked out for the night. It's the kid who's
Yes.
coughing for 3 weeks that the parents are like, but I just want to go in there. And I'm like, yeah, but that cough might linger for a while. Maybe they don't need as much. So I think that's a great way to think about it.
Right. More disturbing you than them.
Exactly. I have a few more things I'm going to go through. I'm just going to remind any listeners, if you have any questions specific about your kids or more general about sleep training, please feel free to write in. I do have a few more things I'm going to go through. Any thoughts on, I think another time we see a big setback in sleep is when a new sibling comes into the home. And I'm sure you've had some experience with this, given that you keep bringing new siblings into the home. any any thoughts on how to approach that? Usually I feel like it's like the 2 to 3 year old who I think has some fear of missing out overnight when the baby's awake. And any thoughts on how to approach that?
Yeah. So, there's a division of time that has to start happening where you don't have all this time to give one single child anymore, that they were used to having. And so giving really specific one-on-one time whenever you can, just little pockets where you're solely focused on big sibling, whether that's through their routine or the baby is down for a nap and you sit on the floor with them and let them lead the play, and how you're interacting with each other. Even just 10 minutes fills that cup for them, that need that they have for that connection with you. You're not on your phone, you're not trying to multitask, you're just in the zone with them. And that's really what they're craving whenever they're coming out of their room and waking up all night, is that connection. They're going to get it with you some way, shape, or form. And so being intentional about it and doing it, in those pockets of time during the day can really pay off for the bedtime struggles and the middle of the night wakings as well. And then I also adopted this strategy of not always making them wait on the baby. If the baby was crying, but the toddler needed something too, sometimes the toddler got what they needed first and not the baby, and it's just, I verbalize that. I would, say the baby's name, hang on, mommy will be right there. I'm going to help big brother with what he's doing, and then I'll be there to get you. And then sometimes it was, the opposite of big brother had to wait a minute, but it wasn't always the older sibling waiting on the younger sibling, because for me, the older sibling is going to remember more than the baby is. And so I think really being intentional about not always putting the baby first went a long way in how they adapted to that change.
And because I promised I'd bring up some New York City stuff, I think, this is going to be a little bit different than for you, I'm sure. But here, really commonly is an issue with, the parents may have only a 1 bedroom home and they're trying to sleep train a child and they're sleeping in the room. And when the kid wakes up, what should they do? Any suggestions on how to approach, these small living spaces where parents and babies may, for a very extended period of time, be sharing a bedroom?
Totally, yeah. And a lot of people think that they can't sleep train because of that. So they just don't address it at all. But really, the bulk of sleep training does happen when you're still awake, which is beneficial. So it's, if you can get that initiating sleep happening at bedtime while you're still awake, then that goes a long way in those nighttime wake ups. And then if you're going to be room sharing and you need to work on the nighttime wake ups, they're not going away, parents can move out of their room temporarily. Like, I'll have parents take their mattress to the living room and just sleep out there for a few nights. It just makes it a little bit easier to be consistent in the middle of the night. And then bumping up the white noise, that's a big one. That way, because oftentimes parents are waking babies waking parents, and it's just that back and forth all night long of each other's noises. And so bumping up the white noise or adding an extra one can be really helpful. Again, using the slumber pod kind of gives them their own sense of space, so they're not popping up and looking at you across the room and wondering why you're hiding under the covers and not coming over to them. I think that a lot of those strategies are really, really helpful in addressing and improving sleep, even whenever you're in a same room or a small space.
Perfect. And I will say for some families, they can kind of, I always say, can you creatively cordon off an area? Can you put up some kind of screen? Can you use a closet? Is there any way to do this? And, I think as New Yorkers, we're good at being creative with our space. And so questions come in from Erica. Hi, Erica. Thanks for tuning in. My daughter is 4.5 and keeps getting out of bed 10 or more times a night. That sounds Terrible. We try to ignore her, but it's not really working. It's one excuse after another why she's out of bed. What do you recommend?
I think this is really a great place to use the bedtime pass because she's looking for that control and has all these reasons for getting up. So if she can think of one really good reason to use her pass, then she gets that fulfilled. She can go back to bed. And then something that we implemented with my daughter, she's the testy one, was if she didn't use her pass, then she got to trade it in the next morning for a sticker or putting something on a chart, and so many stars earned some sort of prize. A movie night with popcorn was always her big one that she wanted to have. She wanted to have a movie night in mom and dad's room, and eat popcorn in our bed. And so that was a really big incentive for her. You have to kind of find their currency and know like how you can buy them essentially. But using that bedtime pass for bedtime, and then again, trading it in for something if you don't use it, can also help curb that getting in and out of bed kind of situation.
And also from Erica, who has a new baby, which might be part of why daughter is getting out of bed, a lot of
Yes.
times. It was just on the news today that parents should be sleeping in the baby's room until the baby is 6 months. We use a monitor for my 10-week-old, but don't feel we need to be sleeping in his room. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So the AAP recently updated those safe sleep recommendations. I'm sure you've read through all those new changes. And so they actually lowered their recommendation for room sharing. They said used to be 6 months, but ideally up to 12 months as a protective factor against SIDS. Now, what most people don't understand is that doesn't increase the risk of SIDS whenever you don't room share. So it's like a baseline if you don't room share with them, because it's still the safest way, or the way that we want to prevent SIDS is using the ABCs of sleep, alone, on their back, and in their crib. So room sharing is something extra, but I've read the research about room sharing that they use to make that recommendation, and it's not great. Like, it's just the studies that they used. I'm like, how did you come to the conclusion that you're coming to with just these studies? And so it's not a requirement, really. It's like one of those what I call a soft recommendation or a soft suggestion. And so I don't think that parents should feel guilty for moving their child earlier than 6 months. I don't feel like they should be pressured to sleep with their baby for 6 months if it's not working for them. They find the highest risk time obviously is that 2 to 4 month range, and then it tapers off after that. And so I think that's why they really lowered it from that year mark too. But yeah, I've always moved my babies early as well, because we just don't sleep well together. I don't sleep, they don't sleep, and we all just end up sleeping better in our own space.
I think this is one of these, families have to do what works for their family. And I think the reason the AAP lowered it, part of the reason was, SIDS technically goes until a year, it qualifies as SIDS, but the vast majority, will dip off after, you said, about 4 months. And what they were realizing by continuing to co-sleep was it was so disruptive for so many people, they were pulling the baby into the bed with them, which was increasing a different part of SIDS. So, it's this constant balancing act. And so I think it's finding, if you're exhausted because your baby's sleeping with you and you can't function, and therefore you're dropping your baby, this is not helping your family, right? So I think it's this constant balancing act. And I think, we obviously want to do everything we can to reduce SIDS, but SIDS is still quite rare. And we still know the single biggest reduction is back to sleep, nothing in the crib. And I think that mantra has to continue to be, we're doing those are the single biggest reductions we've seen with SIDS.
Totally.
So another question is, my almost 2-year-old is skipping his nap recently and going to bed earlier. Should I be almost 2? Should I be pushing the nap? When he does, he takes a solid 2 hours, but then he isn't ready for bed until about 8:30 or 9. I'm not sure when he wakes up in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, with a nap, that bedtime doesn't seem out of the norm, depending on when the nap is happening. And again, like you said, when they're waking up in the morning. And so at almost 2, I would say it's not totally common to completely stop napping. I would say maybe they're napping less frequently during the week. Maybe they still need it, every few days or something like that. But going to bed earlier is a great way to compensate for that. So, I would still kind of implement maybe some crib time or some sort of quiet time to just have that break midday for both you and him, and just to keep that in practice, because as they get older and they do totally drop the nap, having quiet time is hugely beneficial for both child and parent to have that break in the middle of the day. So we don't want to just blow through nap time like it didn't happen, or there's nothing to be doing at that time. But I mean, I wouldn't say that it's something that you have to do every day, especially if you're making up for it by going to bed earlier.
And what I'm hearing you say, which I think is another common misunderstanding among families, is, as kids start to nap and their naps begin to go from 2 to 1 or from 1 to none, being consistent with a routine does not necessarily mean you have to nap them every day. You can kind of sometimes nap, sometimes not. Am I understanding that?
Totally. Yeah. I find the drop to no nap is hardly ever a cold turkey drop. Like, there's usually some sort of fade out. I mean, my oldest probably napped, twice a week for 2 years, like it would build up and he would need to take a nap, and then he'd be good for, a few more days. And then kind of, the same pattern continued until he just kind of maybe was once a week. And then it became none of, unless he's like really sick. And then he'll occasionally take a nap, but yeah, it's hardly ever they just stopped and then it's over.
Another question from Brian. Hi, for a while now, my 5-year-old ends up moving into my bed by morning. Sometimes I don't even realize. I started giving rewards if she stays in her bed. Thoughts on this tactic? Should I just let her?
I mean, as far as just letting her, like, does it work for you? Or does it bother you? I mean, there's nothing wrong with, those early morning snuggles if you want them, if that works for you guys, if it's not disruptive. However, if you want to, there's nothing wrong with giving rewards in that regard either. Most people are extrinsically motivated. Nobody goes to work and, does it for free, right? So even adults are extrinsically motivated. And so giving a reward for the behavior that you want to see is really great. We don't want to see is bribery, where you give them something and then the task happens. So we want them to do the task and then have the reward after the fact to reinforce what they did.
And I find if you do rewards, oftentimes you don't need to do them endlessly. Like, I find like a couple weeks oftentimes resets them, and then they're good for kind of a period.
Totally. Yeah. And there's ways to phase them out. Like, we use fruit snacks when we were potty training our youngest. And so every time he went on the potty, he got a fruit snack. And then finally we were like, okay, now we're going to make a chart. And after you go potty and you mark off X amount of spots, then you get fruit snacks. And we just kept increasing how many spots he had to X off until he got fruit snacks. And then now he doesn't even think about fruit snacks.
Excellent. Any hints on, and again, this is a little bit of a New York City question, or maybe not, because maybe you guys are in cars, but oftentimes we're walking home from pickup, in that late afternoon for the kid who didn't nap, and they're falling asleep at 5:00, 4:30, which is, obviously painful for most of us, I think, because we can just see that bedtime pushing later and later. Any thoughts on, what to do? Those kids need more sleep. Is that normal? And you just have to kind of live with it. Should you be screaming in their face to keep them awake?
Invest in an air horn.
Exactly.
I mean, I find, like, especially even kids that have just started kindergarten, they'll like doze off on the couch for a little while. And sometimes they just really need that from the stimulation to just kind of reset and make it through the evenings. If they do that and they get a little, maybe a second wind to get through dinner and they're still going to bed okay, then I think that it's totally fine to continue. And it really is a phase that they have to, like, their body has to adjust to, of that level of activity and intervention or stimulation, before they can start to kind of power through that afternoon, wanting to doze off and things. And so, if you're in that like limbo of, if they do this nap, it's going to wreck our bedtime. If you're walking home, giving them a snack, keeping them engaged. I'm not opposed to screens in those instances, because it's worth my sanity to have a smoother bedtime. Whatever you can do to really keep them engaged. Roll the windows down, turn on their favorite songs, sing Wheels on the Bus as many renditions as you can, and get them to join along. Sometimes whatever you got to do to keep them awake is worth having an easier bedtime. And yes, going to bed earlier can definitely counteract that for sure.
And any thoughts on screen time before bed? Do you recommend it earlier than 'cause I typically give my kids TV, judge away anyone who wants to. But I usually do it before bed, and I've, heard recently that maybe that's not great. Maybe it should be earlier. Any thoughts on that?
If you're really struggling with bedtime, my suggestion is that 1 to 2 hours before bed is screen free.
Okay.
Especially like I said, if you're dealing with nightmares or issues getting them into bed and staying asleep, and it's that battle for a really long time. Cutting off screens can make a significant difference in that behavior, especially with falling asleep.
Great. So I think that there's no more questions from the audience. I did want to ask you, one of the things I learned about you was that you also certify people to be experts. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Audience might find it interesting.
Totally, yeah. So I quickly discovered that I can't help everybody. There's only one me, and I only have so much time in the day. And I really wanted to change sleep consulting as far as how we're perceived and the kind of support that we can give and the education that we're received, because anybody can call themselves a sleep consultant. It is not a regulated field. There's no governing body. There's no license. There's nothing like that that's required. And so you can read one book and think that you know everything that you need to know about sleep and start your own business. And that can really impact the profession itself as far as our reputation. And, they kind of just lump all sleep consultants together. And so I really wanted to elevate that for sleep consultant or people who want to be sleep consultants. I want you to have a quality evidence-based education with more than one way to sleep train a child, because oftentimes certification programs have like their signature method of how they sleep train. And so you learn maybe one or two ways. And I think that can limit you. I think that limits the people that you can help and the people that will come to you for help. And so we really wanted to create the most holistic course that we could from my business partner and I, our combined years of experiences, to allow other sleep consultants to work with families from all different walks of life and all different sort of desires and needs and around their sleep, and just different cultures and understanding all that stuff. So we built our course out to cover all of those things, and we launched that. It's been a little bit over a year, and I think we have maybe 60 students in our course. Maybe 20 to 30 of those have graduated and started their own businesses. And so it's really been wonderful to mentor them and watch them grow their business and just be able to get more people more sleep help.
It's amazing. And I love that it's kind of similar to what I started by saying, that there's more than one way to do this and people have to find what works for them. Any final words, Ashley, that you want to share with?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me, so we can spread the word that sleep training is not evil and it's not neglectful, and you're also not forced to do it. It's not for every family. You shouldn't feel pressure to change something that is working for you, even if somebody says they do something different. Like, try not to view people doing things differently as an attack on your parenting or your parenting style or anything like that. I feel like there's a flavor out there for everybody. There's not one single right way to parent. There's, just that, any sort of thing that you read about attachment is all about that warmth and connection. And you can continue to have that with sleep training, or if you choose not to. So either way you go, you can't mess up.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley. This was super fun. And hopefully we'll be in touch over things coming up in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye, Ashley. Thank you, everybody, for joining. After the podcast, they will have up, there'll be up our contact info if anything comes up from us. If you enjoyed this, if you want to circle back to our last podcast where we spoke with Judy Delaware from Feeding Littles, that was also a really great, lively conversation. I really appreciate everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a great night, and hope that tonight, at least, you get some good sleep. Thanks. Bye-bye.